Proceed with the program. Panelists like Professor András Máté-Tóth, the chair of the panel is coming already, the other members too. Please take your seats in the panel. Já ho rychle přinesu. No?
Ladies and gentlemen, I know that I hope that you had a relaxing time during the lunch break. Now I'd like to invite you to come back to the main hall because what hopefully will be one of the highlights of our conference is just starting the last panel, or something what I'd like to call a panel discussion on the future development of religion or religions and implications for international relations. My name is Petr Kratochvíl. I'm a professor at the Institute of International Relations here in Prague, and it is my honor to welcome you back to our last meeting, but also to welcome the exquisite setup of our panel, our four speakers, whom I will briefly introduce in a moment. But before that, I want to say a couple of words to perhaps introduce our panel in maybe slightly controversial way by presenting you the basic, because my background is international relations, international studies, and if you look at my discipline, the basic discussion that you have about the relationship between religion and politics, essentially you have two camps of scholars. One camp is the camp whose perhaps one of the most famous representatives is Mark Juergensmeyer, and scholars of that type who claim indeed religion has an impact on global politics, but this impact is essentially negative, it's destructive. Juergensmeyer talks about a cosmic war, about the specific nature of religion that makes conflicts, political and violent conflicts, even more destructive than non-religious conflicts. So that's one side of the debate. And the other side, scholars who are claiming this is not true because religion, in fact, is not that relevant. Religion is only a veil hiding real influences hidden behind religious rhetoric. These influences might be political power, might be economic interests. So in fact, criticizing the first camp. So in fact, what we have are two positions, one saying the influence of religion is real, but it's negative, or the influence of religion is in fact marginal. Religion is irrelevant, right? So in fact, two positions that many of us, I assume, are not comfortable with, either or, right? And that is the starting point where I'd like to invite our speakers to speak about their background, about their experience, about their research related to religion and politics. Do they agree with these two positions, or do perhaps they find a third way between the two? And let me introduce the four speakers that we have on the panel. I'll start in the order the speakers will be talking as well. So the first of those is Jaume de Marcos. Jaume de Marcos. That's my Castilian in confusing the Catalan name. Jaume de Marcos, the Vice President of the United Religions Initiative in Europe, and also representing here UNESCO Association for Interreligious Dialogue, being based in Barcelona. Jaume has a lot of experience with interfaith dialogue, cooperation, participation of forums on religion and society. He has published extensively on a number of different topics, conflict resolution related to religion. He has also, interestingly, written extensively about important religious figures such as Erasmus or Servet. Welcome, Jaume. The second speaker on my list is Professor András Máté-Tóth, sitting to his left, who is a professor for the study of religions at the University of Szeged in Hungary. Again, writing extensively on the relationship between religion and politics, and interestingly, somebody who is specialized in Central and Eastern Europe, right? So hopefully we'll have some intense, overly not too heated discussion about religion and politics in our region as well. The third speaker to his left is Professor Petr Jonkers from Tilburg University in the Netherlands, from the Department of Systematic Theology and Philosophy. Petr is a specialist in issues related to religion in the public sphere, religious diversity and truth, interestingly, tolerance, intercultural philosophy, and the future of the Catholic Church, an interesting topic that I'm sure will come up in the discussion as well. And the final speaker, and my good friend on the very left, Professor Ivana Noble, who is a professor at Charles University Evangelical Theological Faculty, director of the Ecumenical Institute at the same faculty, but also a priest in the Czechoslovak Hussite Church, and a former president of Societas Ecumenica. Her research interests cover ecumenical theology, cultural theology, postmodern society, Christian spirituality, and interestingly, Orthodox theology as well. So we cover, as you can see, quite a wide range of topics, but also a quite diverse range of geographic areas, which I think is a good thing. So let's see whether there is something in which the views can cross-pollinate. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to the speakers, but I'll ask them before to talk only for 10 minutes, just a brief introductory intervention for each, so that we have enough space for your input and the discussion that will hopefully follow from that. So, Jaume, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming to this panel, and also I would like to thank the organizers of the conference for their kind invitation to me, representing the United Religions Initiative in Europe. So Prague is a city of many bridges crossing over the Moldau River. I am always moved by the sounds of Bedřich Smetana, the Moldau, when the river enters the city of Prague and the epic fanfare of the Vyšehrad theme is heard, as if the city herself was welcoming the waters of the river from its magnificent bridges. In a more metaphorical sense, Prague is also a city that bridges Eastern and Western Europe, a hub and a crossroads for the crisscrossing of people, cultures, artistic trends, and research, and the bastion for freedom of belief and thought, from the religious reformer Jan Hus, whose statue proudly stands in the center of Old Town Square, to the 1968 revolt against Soviet domination. Prague is a symbol and an inspiration for all of us. Interreligious dialogue also wants to build bridges among beliefs, cultures, traditions, and most importantly, women and men who profess them, who incarnate them. There have been many attempts in the past to foster mutual knowledge and recognition between religions, almost always with limited success, or simply no success at all. Religious hate and religious wars have been regrettably all too common in human history. In modern times, the movement for interfaith dialogue started with the first World Parliament of Religions, gathered in Chicago, United States, as part of the program of the 1893 World Exhibition. Out of that groundbreaking event, several organizations appeared in the following years, trying to preserve and expand the experience and inspiration from the original Parliament of Religions. Then, a few years later, the interfaith movement slowly declined, while the world was ravaged by war and conflict. In 1986, Pope John Paul II revived interest in interreligious collaboration by calling for a gathering of religious leaders to pray for peace, which took place in the Italian city of Assisi. A few years later, in 1993, a second Parliament of Religions was gathered in Chicago to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the original event. And an increasing number of interreligious events and gatherings were organized around the world, asking for more collaboration and understanding between religions around the world. The path, however, was not easy, and it was difficult to move beyond one-time events that could be very inspiring and become headlines in TV news, but little remained from them. A new kind of interreligious organization arose by the end of the 20th century. In 1993, as we heard this morning, Christian theologian Hans Küng had solemnly declared that there will be no world peace without peace between religions. A similar idea inspired Episcopal Bishop William Swing from San Francisco in 1995, when he was asked to lead an interfaith ceremony celebrating the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations. Bishop Swing wondered why, if there was an organization for United Nations, there was no similar body for United Religions. And although the idea of establishing a United Religions organization proved initially impossible to attain, starting a United Religions initiative proved to be more feasible. Since the signature of its founding charter, the United Religions Initiative, or URI, has expanded to over 1,000 local groups called cooperation circles in over 100 countries and territories. What is the distinctive trait that may define the URI as embodying a substantially different kind of organization compared to other older interreligious associations? Actually, most of the older interfaith organizations have been mostly led and oriented towards religious leaders and academics. In contrast, the URI turned to the grassroots, to local groups gathering people of different faiths who were already working together or wanting to do so, learning from each other and inserted in the social fabric of their own local communities. The only requirements that the URI asked to become a cooperation circle was that the group was composed of people of 3 different faith traditions at least, and that they agreed with the charter and the purpose of the organization. This way, the organization grew more as a network than as a hierarchical structure, horizontal rather than vertical, and emphasizing partnership, diversity, and good practices. The core values of URI, I think, particularly adequate to deal with the topic that we are discussing today, that is building bridges toward peace and the impact of religion on global politics. The good practices implemented by URI cooperation circles are inspired by those core values and combine intercultural bridge building with community-based actions. These core values may be summarized as to reduce violence motivated by religion, to foster interreligious and intercultural cooperation, and to promote cultures of peace, justice, and healing. And we are talking about reducing religious violence, being totally aware that completely eliminating religious violence is not an easy it's not an easy thing to do. So how can we reduce religious violence? First, by fostering mutual knowledge and cooperation, lowering fears, diminishing hate, asking for mutual respect and mutual knowledge. We in the interfaith movement are sometimes, or perhaps too often, too optimistic about this purpose, as we usually meet people of faith who are already interested in and willing to participate in interfaith dialogue. However, we also engage with people who are reluctant or even quite contrary to dialogue with other people, with people from other faiths. There may be confrontation. Then we are asked also to do a mediation task. And we can use tools for mediation that have been successfully developed to deal with this kind of situations, with the added value that people of faith within the same communities, and not just mediation professionals, are involved in this task. In religious terms, the URI emphasizes the fact that all religions call for love, respect, justice, and peace as core elements, invoking those common principles, but not trying to ignore or downplay differences as if they didn't matter, is quite essential for achieving greater understanding. Working at the grassroots level, we can prevent the manipulation of the population by those who want to promote hate and confrontation between communities, individuals, and nations. It is not an easy or short process, but it needs to be done if we want to succeed in the medium and long term. Other success stories at the grassroots level involve empowerment for women and youth in local communities, training for youth community leaders, for example, in Uganda, or gathering groups of women from all continents to share their stories about women empowerment, or building networks of mutual support in countries such as the Philippines, Pakistan, or Tanzania, encouraging school attendance for young girls, sharing responsibilities with men and women in their own communities, or providing training about social entrepreneurship, caring for natural resources, or dedicating at least one day around the year to open doors of places of worship to visitors, not to convince or convert them, but to welcome them, greet them, and helping them learn about other faith traditions, such as we are already doing in Berlin, Barcelona, and more cities every year. Working in local communities may not always get the headlines in international news, but it means building a stronger foundation for social and political change as people learn to work together despite their differences. Whether these differences involve their faith or religious tradition, the potential for radical enduring change in interpersonal and social relationship is even higher. So what is the future of religion in the 21st century? Although apparently religion is one of those aspects of human life and culture that seems to remain always the same, something that is always a safe reference when quick social change alters our common values, religion has actually been changing rapidly in the world in the last decades. I would say that two main trends may be perceived. One, those who feel endangered by change and want to keep their old truth and customs, reverting things back to a past idealized world that is felt as safer and more comforting. And on the other hand, people who are working together with shared goals while keeping their own inviolable traditions and identities safe and alive. The first way leads to closure, entrenchment, and sectarianism. The second way leads to fruitful exchange of views and collaboration for the common good. The interfaith movement wants to encourage religious people around the world, and non-religious people too, to leave behind their fears and open their hearts. In the words of Bishop Swing, I believe in an ultimate community that flourishes within and beyond all communities, a community that responds to echoes of mercy and whispers of love. May these echoes and whispers be heard by all people of goodwill, so that we may cross together the bridge, the spiritual bridge that will allow us to cross over the tides and violence and hatred and bring us into a new, better, happier world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the great introduction to the topic of our panel. I have a few remarks that perhaps we can pick upon in the discussion. I really like the strong introduction in the history of the interfaith and interreligious dialogue. And indeed, there is a venerable history behind the interfaith dialogue in Europe and globally speaking. But also we have to be open about the number of challenges that we are facing. At the recent meeting of the World Council of Churches in Karlsruhe, there was an open talk about a crisis of the ecumenical movement for a number of reasons. Of course, some of those related to the war in Ukraine, but many going beyond that. And I think that there is a critical juncture for the interfaith dialogue, more broadly speaking as well. And I think one of the big questions behind that is the question of how to reconnect these international elite fora, because that's what they typically are, with what you just mentioned in your speech, and that is the community-based action. And perhaps one of my questions would be, how can we do that, right? How can we connect these two levels that somehow seem to sometimes function without any linkages? So how to connect the best practices on the level of community, and perhaps you have some concrete examples that you can talk about later. And the second notion that I want to, select from your talk is the allusions to religious violence. And again, for me, this is a term that, frankly, even though that's my specialization, and I'm not sure I understand the term, right? Because behind that, there is a multiplicity of phenomena of different origins, different sociological background that are hidden behind the label. So perhaps we can talk about that as well in the discussion. But thank you very much. András, may I ask you for your intervention? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am surprised how many people are here after eating something and you are not doing rest. So sleep with patience. As a scholar of religion, I cannot avoid to make only a very short definition what means misuse, because many paper deals with the question of a definition. It is always a little bit a humorful way. Misuse is the daughter of Mr. Use and Mrs. Use. Yeah. Perhaps a little bit joke is allowed. But I prepared a short statement, so I will read it. Who wouldn't want peace? Who? There are those. There are many. Arms dealers and political powers that want to assert their hegemony, they want war. Mercenaries who want to make money by killing of others, they want war. Believers who want revenge for the insults of their own religion, they want war. Many do not want peace. They want war. From a European point of view, the thought that war was no longer a European thing since the Second World War, then came Srebrenica. And then Russians came and attacked Ukraine in Europe. And then the arms dealers sell their weapons, and the politicians go and vote to increase the cost of defense of their own countries. And then other politicians elevate their position by shooting even louder the slogans, "We want peace, never more war." And the much-praying faithful comes, and the priests and bishops come and find the legitimacy of war in the gospel of the peace. And they explain that peace must be present in our soul. And the world is dominated by secular logic, so they want war. They support war. And they find reasons why funding their church is more important than taking risk for the proclamation of peace. Many are. They don't not want peace, or at least do not want peace strongly enough. Fortunately, there are many who do want peace. And they are seeking cultural and religious resources to be able to persist in wanting peace, sources that can inspire them to want peace amid war. One of those sources might be religions, the great world religions, Christianity and Islam, Hinduism, and as well the philanthropic atheism as well. Suppose in the name of religion it has been possible in history to initiate wars and massacre masses in the name of religion. In that case, it is the time to prevent wars in the name of religion, to inspire people to take the commandment to not kill seriously, to take the golden rule seriously. Do not do others what you would not want them to do to you. However accurate it may be that religions in Europe have lost their old influence, but it is also true that especially in Central and Eastern Europe there are many people for whom their religion is essential. And not just because their nationalist sentiments are in synchron with their religious feelings, but also because religion makes them find refuge in a troubled world. And it is from religion that they draw the strength to make the world normal. That is how Hans Küng, one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, summed up the relationship between nations, religions, and frog. No peace among the nations without peace among religions, I quote him. No peace among religions without dialogue between religions. And no dialogue between the religions without investigation of the foundation of the religions. It means self-critic. End of quote. Religions have the opportunity and the duty to make peace and live in harmony with each other. This means no nationalist advocacy in the name of religion can be supported. In the name of religion cannot be supported the perpetuation of a system of injustice and imbalances of the world. But for religions, and I am thinking here only of Christianity and Islam, to be authentic messengers of peace and fair coexistence, they must exercise self-critique. They must look critically at their history, to think critically regarding misuse of religion by themselves. And they must confess with shame before their own God that they have not always been faithful to the God of peace and mercy, to God of Isaiah, Jesus, and Muhammad, who is mercy itself, who values mercy more than justice. A political scientist, Dominic Moisey's message to politicians is, I quote him, "A system that invests power into religion cannot progress if the dominant interpretation of religion is itself hostile to modernity and change." End quote. Only some things that are religion are constructive, and all religion has destructive elements enough. In the name of the same religion, one can build and destroy, make war and make peace. But Moses says, politicians, if there are somebody who is, politicians are wrong to invest in a religion that alienates this world, and a religion that proclaims its message while hiding reality from view. It is in the interest of politics that religion's productive and creative capacity should dominate, and not their dominance as their main product. Religions have to play a prophetic role today. They must remember the eminent visions of humankind: peace, freedom, equality, and most of all, on the promise of healing all wounds. I close with a quotation from the last book of the Christian Bible, Revelation. "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you so much, András, for your introductory words. I just want to draw attention to one central argument that I enjoyed very much in your presentation, and the argument that you also partially modified from Moisey, the argument about self-definition of religion as contrary to modernity, which I think is central, right? The question of whether that argument, is that something that is inherent in our religious traditions, or is it a specific historical construct, a specific situation in which this arose? And in fact, I argue in favor of the latter, because we have many examples, historically speaking. You know, when the first Jesuit missionaries came to China, they were seen as bringers of modernity as well. They were scholars, astronomers, etc., right? So there are historical constellations when modernization and arrival of a religious tradition went hand in hand, right? So the question really is, at least for me, is how come that the revival of religious traditions that we are seeing in our region in particular is mainly a sign of the first, that is anti-modern religious elements. I would not say even traditions, but elements. So this is, I think, the big challenge, something that, in fact, I think scholars of Islam have been dealing for a longer time than scholars of Christianity, because there this question of the relationship between modernity and religion has been on the table at least since the 1970s. But thank you very much for the great intervention. And our next speaker, Petr, please.
So thank you, Petr, and the organizers for the invitation to speak at this conference. I'd like to start with two preliminary remarks. The first is the misuse of religion, which is happening everywhere, as we know. I would say is first of all the responsibility of religions themselves. They should defend themselves against being misused by either politics or other organizations. So that's not the whole story, but it's an important beginning. Secondly, there has been a lot of complaint about states or politicians misusing religion, which is certainly true. But they only can do so if they are supported implicitly or explicitly by religious groupings or their leaders. Without this support, they wouldn't have a chance. So this means that trying to prepare a future for religion implies, and that refers to what Andreu said, for religions becoming or being or continuing to be self-critical. Well, my contribution in this panel is on a small element to promote, to work with this, and that's the problem of religious tolerance. As we all know, religious tolerance is back on the table, and the reason for that is quite simple, actually. That's because the incredible rise of religious diversity, say, after the Second World War. There's been, and that rise of religious diversity throughout the world confronts individual countries and international relations with new challenges. Well, in my view, religious communities and their leaders have an important role to play in responding to the danger of militant intolerance, of which we all know can be given many examples. Namely, by promoting an attitude of tolerance towards adherents of other religions and secular worldviews. To introduce my point, it's useful to make a distinction between toleration and tolerance, a distinction which only exists in English, by the way. Toleration is the objective legal framework that guarantees tolerance, comprising basic human rights like freedom of religion, conscience, speech, etc. Tolerance refers to the subjective attitudes of individuals and societies against people of other stripes of life. To create a climate of tolerance, both elements are essential. This means that the human right to freedom of religion as such is not sufficient to guarantee the peaceful coexistence of members of different communities of faith. What is also needed is that the individual members of these communities are willing to respect each other's convictions and practices, rituals. Well, most liberal democracies and political philosophers who belong to this tradition think that it suffices to further develop and refine the legal framework of human rights, and that the attitude of the citizens follows automatically, that they get it for free, so to say, and does need special attention. Well, in my view, this is a gross mistake. As recent outbreaks of militant intolerance have shown, for instance, against wearing religious symbols in the public sphere, it can certainly be not taken for granted that members of predominantly secular societies actually adopt this subjective attitude of tolerance. More alarmingly, and at the other end of the political spectrum, some politicians misuse the presumed Christian heritage of identity of their society as a pretext to fuel and legitimate intolerance against religious minorities. All this shows that to guarantee tolerance in a society, the objective legal framework of toleration is not enough, but needs to be complemented by a subjective attitude of tolerance. In my view, this is where the role of religious communities and their leaders becomes important. As we all know, religions have an enormous motivational potential, which far exceeds that of the man-made laws of the state. Against this background, it is essential that religious leaders make use of this potential in a positive and constructive way. In this case, by showing through their words and deeds how important an attitude of tolerance and respect for the legal framework that guarantees toleration is. It needs to be noted that tolerance should not be identified with an attitude of soft relativism and indifference towards the ideas and practices of others, which is, as we all know, quite popular in Western Europe. Rather, this tolerance should be conceived as an individual and collective virtue to respect the other in his or her otherness. Obviously, this implies that religious leaders reinterpret the intolerant passages of their own sacred texts and convince their members that an attitude of tolerance is part and parcel of their religious tradition. Religions also have an important role to play in establishing toleration, that is, the objective dimension of tolerance. Religious leaders and theologians should be stimulated to develop what is called in Latin theologia religionis, which means a theology that offers an internal theological reflection on the relation of these religions with other religions, aimed at underpinning a hospitable attitude towards the other religions and secular worldviews. Such a theologia religionis does not require religions to abandon their idea of truth or core values. Rather, it stimulates them to recognize that the inexhaustible nature of God or the divine always transcends the doctrines of all religions, so that no religion can legitimately claim to completely reveal God's essence. A theology that develops these ideas can start from the idea of toleration as a minimal obligation to simply bear or endure the beliefs and practices of the other, and gradually evolve towards the insight that we can genuinely learn from other religions, resulting in an attitude of religious hospitality. This makes religions aware of certain aspects or attributes of the divine that are more prominent in another religion and vice versa. Through these efforts, religions can contribute to global peace, since many international political conflicts are at least partly caused or fueled by inter- or intra-religious strife. Thank you.
Thank you, Petr, so much for your intervention. Again, two remarks. One, I of course very much like your reference to Theologia Religionis, but of course the big question is how to, again, something that I already said before, how to couple these discussions to the practical workings of the concrete religious communities, right? Because I'm sure we would, all of us, be able to make a long list of theologians, Islamic, Christian, and otherwise, who are in favor of such a position. Hans Küng was already mentioned here. But the question is how to ensure that this Theologia Religionis reaches to the grassroots level, how to ensure that those who preach to local communities keep with this tradition and not a tradition of hatred and division, which I think is a big question for all of us. But thank you so much. I have some more questions, but we'll come back to it later. And finally, Ivana, please.
miracle of technology. Thank you very much for the invitation. When I was thinking about the impact of religion on global politics, it took me back to the conversation I had with Mark Juergensmeyer at the end of 1990s during the conference on religion and violence, just when he finished writing his work, The Terror in the Mind of God, which is dedicated to the interviews with people from different religions who were engaged in terrorist activity, and where he wanted to prove that religion is not innocent, that it is not the other, it's not the social, cultural conditions, it's not the psychological deprivation that contributes to the act, or at least it's not the other only. That time I asked him whether he thinks that the role of religion is only negative. And he said, no, I don't think that, but I think that the negative role was so downplayed that we need to open this conversation. What I would like to do today would go to the other way around, because we speak quite a lot about the negative role of conversation. And I would like to ask what is left of religion in the secular imagination when it is reduced to an ideology that pretends to have an overworldly power, when religion is seen as a constructor of traditional values in inverted commas, as a way of belonging, but also as a sort of control and as a source of conflict. I think the first question I would want to ask is, what do we mean by religion when we speak about the impact of religion on the global politics? Whether negative impact or whether limiting that impact, making religion not as relevant. I think if we take the classical theories of religion, for example, Ninian Smart, we would speak about different dimensions of religion, whether they would be 6, 7, or 8. The number is not that important, but I think it is important all that religion represents, all that different religions represent. I would try to translate it perhaps in more current language rather than quoting Smart. I think today what comes most to the front when we want to speak about the positive impact of religion, it would be spirituality and ethics. But both spirituality and ethics in different religions, they have longer roots. They include also sacred narratives, religious experiences, but also doctrine, institutions, the material culture, or even cultivating of the political and the economical relationships in the public sphere. And these are just some dimensions. But I wanted to mention them just that we would perhaps open a little bit more broadly the notion of religion when we speak about its impact on global religion. Of course, there are examples, and the examples look that they come from religious sphere that confirm this reductionism of the secular imagination, or confirm the idea that religion in the public sphere is dangerous or wrong. Is Putin a religious leader or not? Is Patriarch Kirill just a heretic or not? I think these are really important questions we need to deal with. Or are they presenting a secularization of religion from within religion itself? I think if we start asking these questions, we coming perhaps from the part of the world that experience violent secularization. Hi there, violent secularization. Know only too well that secularization can be also aggressive force, and it can take on itself some of the dimensions and elements of religion only too well. If we follow the case, or at least a little bit the case of these examples, one of the problems which was addressed frequently enough is the rhetoric of the traditional values. The rhetoric which is used both by the Patriarch Kirill but also by Vladimir Putin. This rhetoric has been very strongly proclaimed at the World Council of Churches Assembly in Busan in 2013, when Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev presented the vision of Russia being a defender of such values, being a defender of such values against so-called secular West. He claimed that, I quote, "Traditional values are seen as proclamations of the permanent truth of the Christian faith, and that moral teaching is as important for salvation as dogma." It's of course interesting to see what does he mean by these values and by the moral teaching. Part of it would be the sexual morality and the traditional family as he sees it. But there would also be things like peace. Peace would be one of the traditional values. And in that speech, he protests against not only the expulsion of religion from the public life, but also against the militant secularism, he says, that destroys not only religious holy sites and symbols by demanding that they are removed from the public domain, but also he argues against wars that are either religiously motivated or that they use the secular motivation. When Russia attacks Ukraine in February, Alfeyev remains silent. He remains silent to the time when he is moved away to Hungary, where he had previous connections, and speculations continue whether this is the policy of the Moscow Patriarchate just to have a reserve if Kirill falls, a reserve who would be reasonably clean, or whether this would be punishment for his silence. We do not know, and I do not want to go in my presentation that direction. I wanted to use one example from Christianity to show the ambivalence of the rhetoric using religion, and the ambivalence that comes from both state leaders, religious leaders, and theologians. Do they act on the grounds of religion, taking on board religious doctrine, sacred narrative, ethics, rituals, religious experiences, institutions, material culture, political and economical relationships? Partly yes, and we can see that religion here is not innocent, but partly not, because we can see how they twist the doctrine, the ethical principles, even the experiences. And in fact, how they introduce a new kind of secularity when the deeper religion is deprived of power, and when those who want to represent not the Russian religious narratives, but the longer Christian or even patristic or biblical Christian narrative, how they end up in prison, how they are persecuted, or how they are forced into exile again. So when we look into this amalgam of the good and bad within the impact of religion on the global politics, I think that this is what we need to bear in mind. I would want to use now other examples, which I consider also important, and I would take them from other account. I would want to speak about, about the rise of the liberal and secular pseudo-religion, which uses the notion of political correctness, and which I would say is the counterpart to the traditional values, because there is nothing traditional about that. I remember when my friends in Luton told me, when the town council decided to send to the old people seasonal greetings instead of Christmas wishes, that Muslim community protested against that, saying that there is no season that would be in abstract and that they would prefer to receive Christmas wishes. This neutralization of religion doesn't lead anywhere because, again, it deprives religion of these deep forces. I think celebrating Hanukkah, Christmas, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindus, other religious festivities means that we come back to the different dimensions of religion which are authentic and which can recover some deep sources that would challenge the violence and would help to bring the peace together and build bridges of peace. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Ivana. Very interesting talking points with some controversy, at least for me, in it as well. I perhaps want to just draw attention to one of those, the question of when religious leaders get involved in politics. You seem to imply, but perhaps I misunderstood, that this is a kind of secularization, which I would understand, but then to what do we apply that? Do we apply that to only those we disagree with, saying they are twisting religion, or is it in fact can we apply it to everybody? Because on the other hand, I assume that you want to preserve the space for intervention for religious actors in the public sphere. So is any type of that intervention a sort of secularization, and if so, how then do we distinguish between the good secularization and the bad one in that narrative? And also another one, perhaps we'll come back to it, the discussion whether we can really create this kind of symmetry between a religion of political correctness and the twisting of religion that you described on the traditional conservative side. And I have my doubts about this symmetry. I don't believe in it, but perhaps that's again an interesting point for the discussion. So please let me, before I'll start shooting my questions at you, we do not have that much time, but we have about 15 minutes for your questions, remarks, comments. So, and I'll collect a couple of questions in each round. Always please introduce yourself and ask who concretely do you want to speak to. So the gentleman in the back, and then.
Yes, Adam Kutnar, PhD student. I had a question about one side of interfaith international dialogue, which is viewed quite controversially, and that of proselytization, whether this is Western missionaries going to third world countries or the funding of Salafi clerics in the West. What is the role of proselytization going towards the future? A general question. Thanks.
So it's targeted to whoever want to answer. Thank you, but probably mainly Jaume and the gentleman in the front.
It's Pavel Bargar, Protestant Theological Faculty, Charles University. Thank you very much. Peace has been on radar in this panel as well as those previous panels, but I'm wondering if we should not add some other concepts to peace as well as our horizon toward which we are heading. Because as we saw, for example, in Ivana's presentation, that very often opponents, people of different views, use the word peace and have very different things in mind there. And also, I know from my Ukrainian friends that they are, yes, peace, that's what we want, but it shouldn't come without justice, restoration, penitence. So I'm wondering if there should be some other values and themes to be mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. And a third question from the lady in the back, please.
So once again, No? Okay, now. So, again, I will start with something that is not Jewish for change. I don't see any Hindus and Buddhists here, however, it's called interfaith dialogue. So I will quote from Tripitaka, when a Hindu is asking Gautama Buddha, how can a blind man reach to a certain place? and he is also asking how somebody who is physically handicapped can reach to that particular place. And Gautama Buddha answers that the blind one will climb over on the shoulders of that the handicapped one will get on the shoulders of the blind man and show him the directions, and they will get to the goal. So that's from Buddhism. From my religion, we say when, if not now, and who, if not me. And I think that the me should be us. So I have a question, and the question is, if we recognize Ukrainian people as refugees and we help them, and we should help them, how come that we call Syrian people in the European Union Syrian people on whose heads are falling exactly the same bombs by Mr. Putin, like on the Ukrainian people? How can we call them illegal immigrants? So, if not me, who? If not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps I'll reverse order. Ivana, if you don't mind, can we start with you commenting on any of the three interventions or my points, whatever you want to choose, please?
Yeah, thank you. I would start with the question about the peace and other values. I think it's true that when we speak about peace or secularization of religion, that we always see it from our perspective. I think it is very visible, for example, in the critique of Pope Francis and his engagement in relation to Ukraine and Russia, which has been very complicated, and I think it caused very divisive reaction. The war shows us that you cannot really have peace without justice. You cannot have peace at the expense of somebody being knocked down completely. And also, I think we already spoke here about the value of mercy. These can be abstract concepts, but we move them from the abstract level when we really take the different dimensions of religion seriously. And when we take seriously the practice that comes with that, because only that practice can be transformative, both for the people involved and for other people. It's not the abstract ideas that have this power. And I would want to comment a little bit also on the proselytism or the proselytization. Yes, it has been criticized both in the ecumenical and interreligious circles. And if you have, I think, the complex approach to religion, we realize that it is present in all of our religions. But at the same time, there is a very strong critique of that. I think we would not manage to eliminate such processes. Until now, I have Orthodox friends who desire to rebaptize me, and I still speak to them even if I know about their desire, and from their point of view, it is a kindness towards me. It's not kindness from my perspective. But I think it is always the question, what can we do about that? And how can we move people to move from these positions? And it has to happen at the personal as well as the institutional level.
Thank you, Ivana. Petr, your answers?
Unlike my dear colleague Ivana, I would like to defend proselytizing under the condition that it is not in a forceful way. All of us are proselytized by commercials for whatever kind, and we don't seem to mind about that. So there is proselytizing for Coca-Cola, for whatever, all over the place. So why should religious be forbidden to do that? Having said that, then I agree with you that the churches, especially the Catholic Church, have a long tradition of what you could call forced conversion. And that is indefensible, obviously. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church has become aware that this is not a way to go forward, because you, in fact, put people under pressure with false arguments and with all kinds of things which are improper. But if we seriously believe that the religion we have, I mean that not only applies to me but to any religion, offers you the path to a good life in many respects, why wouldn't you forbidden to make people aware of this happy or good message? Of course, it's a tricky remark, I realize, but I want to. There's a lot of critique for good reasons against proselytizing. Okay, I accept that, but that's how society works nowadays.
Thank you so much. András, your comments?
I would like to go into your question why Ukrainian migrants are refugees and why Syrian refugees are migrants. I think it's normal because for European people, the Ukrainian people are, to be simple, culturally more near than people from the Middle East. And the question of politicians, I think in all countries of the world, as well in Europe, is how can we collect voters for us being actually in power. Now, because the general common people are more open for Ukraine refugees, therefore the politicians, they are interested in being still in the power. They say they are refugees, we make a welcome culture, yes? And if the population is more unfamiliar with people from the Middle East or from Africa, then politicians, of course, they follow the common sense of their own society, and they said, they are threat for us. So what can we do? Somebody said, the embassy, that we should warn politicians, governments, to think seriously and to be ready to offer their own power for a truth thinking, a just thinking. I think it is too much to ask for a government. I know, but because I am a religious scholar, we should think in utopias and never in reality. So, and the main task of us is to focus on an impossible utopia. And then other people, they are responsible to manage the reality. They should be permanently irritated by remembering on the main fantasies and main utopias and main visions of the world religions and as well of the philanthropic atheism.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jaume.
Yeah, I would like to address the issue of proselytism or trying to convert people. I think that's what your question was about. So in interfaith groups, it's quite common that there are, from time to time, somebody comes to tell the truth about things and life and the universe. And it's quite fine. It's quite, because it's good for them. They have discovered that. They feel good about that. They feel more comfortable. They feel safe. They feel happy. And they want to share it with other people. That's totally fine. When they find out that we are not really going to convert, or that we are keeping our own faith, our own traditions, while still wanting to share whatever we have in common and work together, most of them just relax and accept the situation and go on with that. Those who don't, usually they leave because they are not ready to do that kind of work. But it's this kind of process. You have to give people time and understand what cooperation and what working together in interfaith situations is about. And also referring to the issue of peace and what the price must be paid for peace. I referred during my talk about peace with justice and with healing. I think there can be no peace if it's not a fair peace and if there is no healing involved. And there can be no healing in situations of violence or in situations of injustice. So unless the three parts of this situation, like three legs of a chair, right? If one of them falls, the other two cannot stand on their own. So this is something that we need to take into account.
Thank you so much. I'll just ask the organizers, do we have still time for one more round? No. Okay. So in that case, I'll just conclude with thanking very much to all the speakers. I hope there will be some time afterwards for you to approach the speakers. So please join me in thanking the speakers. Thank you so much. And please do not leave us yet, because we are immediately, without a break, jumping into the final concluding session. So thank you very much, and please stay with us. Thank you.